That just means in Seneca, hello, I hope these words find you well. That's how we greet somebody, that we find you well. And it seems to me that during this time, I do hope all of you are well. And I was very excited to participate. I participated in the past on Resilience for Transformations series. And in this series, what I find so important, especially for this time, and I'm glad that Beth continued to pull everybody together to tell their stories at this time, because I think now more than ever with isolation, et cetera, that's needed. The Transformation series, or Storytelling for Healing, is key, as it's in storytelling that we learn to become human, in the words of our poet laureate Joy Harjo, that we learn to become human, not in a way that remarks in kind of social scientific racism where we all become civilized, but human in a way where we learn to relate to each other and the non-human as well, or the plants, the animals, and the earth. So storytelling is a very big part of that, and memory can be a very big part of that as well. But before we begin, I also wanted to just take a moment to think as it relates to the land acknowledgement at Tomba. Today, I'm not on Tomba land. I am on Wabanaki land and close to Norridgewock, Maine, which is where a large massacre took place. So there's no longer Indigenous people in this area. The closest people are the Penobscot and the Passamaquoddy. That's whose land I'm on today. That's whose land I was brought up in for a large part. Whose land I recognize and know the islands, the streams that I've been kayaking this morning, and I've been very fortunate to understand how the rivers operate here in this place. But at UCLA and the American Indian Studies Center, as well as Repair, as well as others, acknowledge the Tomba peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tavangna, or the Los Angeles Basin, Southern California Channel Islands. And we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on behalf of the Traktum, the indigenous peoples in this place. There's lots of indigenous peoples now that make LA their home, and their memory of their own homes and where they come mixes and blends with those memories that we have of Tomba land. It's important to recognize that when I work on this acknowledgement, and I look at it more as a land introduction with Tomba elders and community members, one of the things they wanted was to not just be remembered for being on the land, but to really think about the cyclical nature of memory and land and how they operate together. So in a way, this acknowledgement is a remembrance, but one that should drive you to action, and one that we, as individuals or parts of institutions, should always begin to build and act upon. So it's not just remembering whose land we're on, it's what do we do now once we recognize that. So as a land-grant institution, we pay our respects to the Honikvatan, the ancestors, the Ahiram, the elders, and the Yohikam, our relatives and relations, past, present, and emerging. In this, memory is a telling of the past. It's a telling of the past so that a present can emerge, and we can emerge in better relationships. So I want to start with just thinking about this particular land introduction in relation to what it means to have memory, to drive us to action, to drive us to healing in storytelling. Because I tell you that my relationship with the Tomba people, I've really benefited from understanding exactly the memory of the land itself, like the springs and the water and the Bayona Creek. With 95% of LA covered, it's really important that we have that memory that exists to drive us to better relationships to the land that we're in. Nothing, I can't say that even enough today, as there's been a lack of containment of fires. Native people had learned to burn, learned to live in the land, but with climate change, these wildfires will continue. But a lot of that's capsulated in memory and indigenous knowledges that are incredibly important. I think about this a lot, especially today, as I drove past a place that holds deep memory to me, memory that's held in my senses, my smell, sight, sound, of what Maine has a particular sound, a particular smell to me. And that's that kind of land in memory. So when we do these acknowledgments, it goes beyond just words. To me, it's also thinking about what that means for the people of California, the American Indian people in particular. So I want to just say that memory is a wonderful word to have chosen to think about how that looks at transformations and healings. And I want to thank you to the sponsors of the series in itself, the Children's Defense Fund of California, the Positive Results Center, the Mizraia Collective, Nefesh, the Bayan Claremont Islamic Graduate School, Puerto Rican Alliance, Puerto Ricans in Action, Anti-Racist Action LA, Transcend Arizona, UCLA Critical Race Studies, Trauma Informed LA, and Yatunde, and the American Indian Studies Center. And you can look at a whole list of our sponsors. What I love about Beth Ribet is that she brings so many different people together to learn each other's stories, and that's incredibly important. So thank you all for coming and for learning today, and I'm sure we're all going to have a wonderful introductions and stories of each other and where we're coming from at this time. So to begin that, I think one of the reasons I was asked, I get to introduce somebody very special to me. She's also Tonawanda Band of Seneca, as am I. She's my daughter, and I'm very proud. This is, she doesn't, she doesn't like speaking in public often. So I think this shows a deep respect for what she believes storytelling can do in this case. So she's Tonawanda Band of Seneca. She is a pre-doctoral fellow on the project Bringing Together Diverse Perspectives on Water that was recently funded by the NSF. Sedonna graduated from UC Santa Barbara, where she won the Transfer Student Research Award for her project analyzing faunal remains so far unique on Pimu Island. For those of you who don't know, Pimu is the Tomba word for Catalina Island. She is simultaneously the archaeology collections manager for the Fowler at UCLA and the UCLA NAGPRA project manager and the project manager of Carrying Our Ancestors Home, in addition to her work as the pre-doctoral fellow. So through these positions, she ensures tribal access to collections, manages the care and return of ancestors and their belongings, and investigates the intersections of archaeology, environment, and reciprocal values concerning care of land. Her current research investigates the history of changing climate and relationships between humans, land, and non-human peoples in Owens Valley and the Los Angeles Basin, particularly as colonial powers seized violent control. Broad areas of interest are paleoecology, indigenous archaeology, environmental change, Native American studies, and disability studies. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Sedonna.
Thanks, Mom. Okay, so she's right. I don't do a lot of public speaking, so bear with me. I'm just gonna keep my screen to the right and hide all of you from my vision. All right. Hello, I'm Sedonna Goeman-Shulsky. I'm Tonawanda Band of Seneca, though I have no clan and I grew up moving around the country. My mother, Mishuana, as you all know, is a professor, and we moved largely based on her appointments and what stage of school she was in. This took us from Palo Alto, land which we remember as Ohlone land, to Tucson, land which we remember as Odom land, to Berkeley, which is also Ohlone and Esalen, to Vermont, land which we remember as Abenaki land, and finally to Los Angeles. Here, land which we remember to be Tongva territory. Throughout my childhood, we visited Maine, which is Wabanaki lands, as a home base where most of our family lives besides those who remain on Tonawanda. Growing up in these various places always exposed me to many different stories from Native and non-Native communities alike. We always made it a point to be involved in our local community somehow, either by attending powwows, other sorts of gatherings, local storytelling events, and always being engaged with the students at whatever college my mom was working at. Talking about this, my mom will reminisce about her own mobile childhood, traveling with her father up and down the East Coast, and how this practice of knowing whose land you're on is one that she knew from her own childhood, and how this passed on to my brother and I, who also remember to check whose land we're on wherever we move. Likely because I was always a visitor, I also felt an urge to belong. I desperately wanted to be useful, a benefit to some community of people, to understand and know the history of a group. I admired the people who I met, who knew the land and each other intimately and soundly. They seemed very sure of themselves and their place in this world. As a child, the best way I could figure out how to do that was to study my own family history, which always felt really shrouded in mystery, with off-limit topics scattered around like minefields. I would sit at the quarters of every adult conversation to catch glimpses into the family history, piecing it together like a puzzle throughout my childhood. I'd sit at the table snipping beans or peeling potatoes while my aunties, mom, and grandmother would talk and cook. It's a very matriarchal process with my family, the sharing of stories. Sometimes it would be idle chat, but often family memories would be recited and I took mental notes. My cousins would tug at my sleeve, tap on my shoulder, try to get me to come outside, but I would stay with the adults to learn everything I could. Upon reflection, this nosiness must have been my beginning as an anthropologist, someone who studies people's lives and histories and beliefs. The memories shared would range from positive to negative. My favorite positive memory is the image of my mother and two uncles holding onto a trailer during a tornado to play Superman. The happiness and recklessness of youth was inspiring to a cautious soul like me. Or perhaps it's the memory of my Uncle Horse keeping baby foxes that he had found abandoned, and the knowledge that at one point my strong mother was a kid, just like me, playing with a box of wild baby animals, carefree and happy, at least until the game warden showed up. Some memories were more tangible. My grandmother's attic is full of memories that have been locked away and inaccessible, to the point us kids always thought it was haunted. The energy in the attic is palpably tense. So many pictures and belts and beadwork locked away in trunks, never to be discussed. I didn't understand what was in there until my grandmother pulled out a family album that she had saved from a fire. She told me that my mother's grandfather had tossed it into a fire after a family fight. She saw hundreds of memories burning up in front of her and wouldn't let them go. Despite her own difficult relationship to this part of our family, she knew that these memories would be cherished and important for us, her unborn grandchildren. But the anger of that moment is still stuck in the burnt pictures of the page, of every page of the book, evident in the burnt corners and in my grandmother's tone as she describes the memory of her event. Our memories affect us deeply as individuals, but collectively too, be it within a family, a community, or a nation. Memory studies folks tell us that memory is passed on both socially and genetically, shaping the collective memories and identity of societies. N. Scott Momaday calls it blood memory in his poem as such. The afternoon is older than the giving of gifts and the rhythmic scraping of the red earth. My father's name is called out and the gift horse stutters out whole, and the whole horizon in its eyes, the blood memories of fathers and sons. Oh, there is nothing like this afternoon in all the miles and years around, and I am not here, but grandfather, father, I am here. Like me, Momaday imagines himself in the stories of his father and grandfather. We're not there, but we are there in the sense that the impact of these moments are cemented on their retelling. And as Momaday traces his patrilineal memory, my own has been passed down through the women of my family, just as Sky Woman grounded her own daughter and created an origin for us all. I'm not one of the children hanging off the side of a trailer, carefree in a natural disaster, but a piece of me retains the feeling of flying through the air like Superman. Blood memory. The idea that our ancestors' experience and knowledge is passed down and retained in your blood, such that when you're near to traditional language, song, crafting, or plants, you can feel the energy of a memory coursing through your veins. Perhaps you felt it, maybe you haven't. Right before this horrible, awful pandemic, my Aunt Faye visited on a cross-country trip to sell ribbon skirts and shirts and quilts. She brought a friend with her, Lola, who's an expert beader. I have always wanted to learn how to bead, and I would picture how to do it in my mind and even daydream about works I wanted to create, but I never knew how. When I asked my mom, she would say that she couldn't remember her years of child labor beading with small fingers, and that my grandmother had been taught when she married into the Tonawanda family, but wouldn't do it anymore, and I better not ask lest I upset her with too many bad memories. They had both walked away those memories, too tainted by painful events to be pulled out in a positive way. So when Lola came, my mother and I had the opportunity to remember our familial skill. And would you guess it? I felt that blood memory. I picked it up quickly and started improvising. I'm by no means an expert or even dedicated, but it felt like I had been beading my whole life. And I imagined that the objects I created in that first week retained the energy of excitement and accomplishment and rediscovering this skill. In my line of work, I deal with those sorts of objects all the time. a lot of beginner pieces or even finished pieces. And I'm an archaeology collections manager and the project manager for NAGPRA here at UCLA. NAGPRA is the Native American Graves Protections and Repatriation Act, legislation that mandates any federally funded institution to return the ancestors they excavated and imprisoned on shelves for centuries now to their descendants. In this work, we deal with a lot of objects, and these objects retain the energy and character of the people who made them. We know this because when a descendant interacts with something that their ancestors held, they feel the blood memory. I've felt it, and I've seen others feel it. That memory comes out as we linger our gaze over a face mask or a mortar and pestle, and it comes out in our hinged breath and the gasp when something familiar makes its way back into our hands. I felt this most strongly working at another institution prior to working for UCLA. I was having a really awful feeling working in the building for the first couple of months I was there, and gradually I became deeply depressed until finally I was allowed access into the ancestors room to do an inventory for a NAGPRA return. And as soon as I walked in, I felt them there, my own ancestors. I wandered into a section of the room and immediately walked right up to a box that had the name of a place that I know to be Seneca right there in front of me. Suddenly, I understood why being in that building felt so weighted and heavy. I had been neglecting my responsibility to their memory and their presence in that same building. So I started to fight to help them be returned. It took many months to be allowed to handle their belongings in order to prepare them for that, but I was finally allowed right before I was leaving my position. When I handled those objects, I noticed that previous non-Seneca people had deemed them non-burial or non-ceremonial, but I knew and felt different. Even not growing up in the longhouse and not growing up in the ceremonies, this material felt important. It triggered a memory in me. Particularly a bear's tooth is something that stuck out. A bear's tooth is something we all recognize as an important sacred belonging, especially as a pendant. And it was a devastating realization that I wasn't going to be able to honor their memory, and they're still actually in that institution today, years after I identified them and supplied the right person to contact. And this is a big motivator for my work at UCLA, and a reminder that attaching memories to these people and these belongings is a vital part of our work as archaeologists and museologists. While many strive for objectivity, despite how non-existent that actually is, they should be striving to understand what descendants remember about these objects and people, so as to treat and care for them correctly until they can go home. Although it isn't how we talk about our work, archaeologists are truly in the game of collecting memories that are tied to tangible objects. We're all that little kid in the corner of echoed conversations, interpreting the physical remnants of communities past. And these memories help us reconstruct our collective past, a process of remembering what the world was like for our ancestors. To do repatriation work, we must try harder to remember everything we can about the individuals we must return for reburial. And we do this by speaking with descendants and inviting them to look at their ancestors' belongings, to situate what these objects were like and where they were used, where people lived, anything to try to understand what these people might have been like. And we can guess this sort of thing and construct memories based on how people were buried to create a proper and respectful reburial, which is a process that nobody has ever had to think about. So it's a huge difficulty constructing memories so that you can have a real reburial. Remembering the stories of our ancestors through retelling stories at the dinner table or handling objects that are thousands of years old is vital to remembering who we are today. Our identities hinge on what memories we retain and retell versus what memories we omit. My grandmother's omission of beading memories totally altered when I came to bead myself, letting that moment I shared be impactful in that particular way. And years of ignorance of the significance of memories has led to my ancestors being kept in boxes on a shelf, 30 years past the date NAGPRA declared they should have gone home, and 2 years past them becoming a prominent memory of my own. Memories like this move me to action, to walking in the footsteps of Sky Woman, so that she is manifested through my conscious practice of living in relation to each other versus the cataloging and possession of settler society. We all have memories that spur us into action or that we lock away and try to escape. And those locked memories can always be processed, dragged out to the surface, just like the memory of beading in my family. Something that was locked away for decades was brought forth, bridging gaps between myself and my mother and my grandfather, leading to a positive outgrowth and creation. The first beadwork I created was a heartberry, a strawberry, which is a healing berry that's good for your heart. And it was a healing project for me as well. So don't shy away from those locked memories. Let's use them to spur us into positive action. Yahweh.
Yahweh. Thank you, Sedona. I believe now we just.
I would. It's my honor to introduce Julian Aguon. I was originally going to ask our intrepid hosts to do all of the introductions for this event, but I had a conversation with Julian Aguon a couple days ago, and he reminded me of several things. One is that stories and the people who carry them need to be acknowledged in the exact specificity of their existence and on their own valiant terms. They need to be acknowledged with love, because powerful stories and the people who give them voice are resilient, and because they are fragile, because they're precious, and because they're very easy to neglect. I'd planned to remain happily behind the scenes for most of this event, but Julian also reminded me yet again that it is not easy to find words about things that are important, such as Julian's stories, but that doing so is good work. So in acknowledging Julian as a friend I hold dear, and as one of Repair's founding and ongoing board members, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to give his introduction. I'm going to share a little from his written bio, which some of you may have read as part of the event publicity, and I'll add a few notes. Julian Aguon is a human rights lawyer breaking new ground at the intersection of international indigenous rights and environmental law. And what I need to add to that is that the international law of the Pacific and the international and US domestic laws governing indigenous peoples and the international and domestic laws bearing on the environment and on the protection of oceans, individually and together, create a legal and political landscape that is heartbreaking. And in this landscape, even if you win a particular case, there are painful costs, because the underlying experiences and stories that motivated you to take legal action are barely recognizable in courtrooms, deemed irrelevant by judges or legislatures. And because even if you win, there are no real remedies. The things that courts are allowed to do in response to forces like colonization, environmental destruction, and non-consensual medical experimentation are so finite and small that they seem to almost make the injuries worse, affirming the message that nothing can really be done to secure justice or heal from harms which continue to unfold. In this landscape, Julian has been an extraordinary and determined force, designing new law, creating new ways of speaking to combat the erasure of Indigenous experiences, and relentlessly telling legal authorities from the Ninth Circuit federal courts to the United Nations that they must learn to listen if their pretensions to know justice are ever to acquire any depth or density or trustworthiness. A native son of Guam, Julian founded his own law firm at the age of 28 to advocate for the myriad peoples of the Pacific region. His firm, Blue Ocean Law, works across multiple jurisdictions and develops innovative legal strategies to advance the self-determination struggles of native and non-self-governing peoples. His projects have included working with the Marshall Islands to seek redress from the harms of nuclear testing, which is almost impossible to conceive of, but something he's nevertheless advanced effectively. He's been fighting to protect the land rights of the indigenous peoples of the Northern Mariana Islands and providing lawmakers from small island states with legal and regulatory tools to better protect their natural resources. And in his own Guam, Julian serves as legal counsel to the legislature and was appointed Special Assistant Attorney General to defend the decolonization process, specifically the right of the native inhabitants of Guam to freely choose their political status. For all these reasons and many others, Julian was named a Human Rights Hero by the Petra Foundation for his work advancing the rights of his own and other Pacific peoples. And as someone who's had the great joy of getting to know him better than you can imagine from a written bio, there are three things I wanted to share today about Julian. One is that he has an exceptional capacity for joy. And when I use the word joy, I'm not confusing it with cheerfulness or reducing it to having a positive attitude. And while I think joy has many valid definitions, one that applies here is this. Joy occurs when we are ferociously honest about the context that envelops us, comprehend that context as much as a person can, and develop recognition of the reasons why our capacity to grow, heal, and love has endured and grown powerful, more powerful than the things that terrorize us. Powerful enough to allow us to imagine and believe in our role in creating a healthier and more just world. And it also requires a loving, powerful, and earnest relationship to memory, the ability to access collective and communal knowledge and to be nourished or mobilized by it. In this sense, Julian is by far one of the most joyful people I have ever met. And when I am around him, my capacity for joy is strengthened. And I find those experiences just inestimably precious. I also need to say that Julian rarely, if ever, remains silent for too long. This does not mean that, like all of us, he never suffers through experiences of silence, but that you can rely on Julian to eventually find words, even when what he is trying to articulate defies recognition, defies articulation, even when it involves risk, even when it is painful to speak for the multitude of reasons that occur in communities and in interactions with the legal system. And the last thing that I want to say about Julian is that he has an exceptional capacity to hold love in rage and balance, and to figure out how to channel those with determination. So with that, it's my great, great pleasure to introduce my very precious friend, Julian Aguon. And I will be putting up his, making sure he is unmuted right now. Just bear with us for a sec. Okay.
I think that worked. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Beth, for that was one hell of an introduction. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm super stoked to be here. And I'll just quickly say, because I think I tried to time this and it's sitting right at 14 minutes, which is right at the limit. So I'll make this really fast. I actually have a memory, and a particular memory. And actually it was, I would say, the highly fraught moment in which I knew that I would become a writer. I guess you could say the moment where a writer was born. But it was actually precisely because I reached for words and couldn't find them at the time. That, yeah, so that's, I smuggled it into a commencement speech I gave last year to the graduating class of a local, our local university. So yeah, so it's a commencement address, but the memory is in here. And I meditate on another writer, Alice Walker, to get to my own hallway. When I first accepted the invitation to speak to you tonight, I knew only one thing for sure. I wanted to avoid the usual offerings that mark this occasion. The future is yours for the taking. Don't be afraid to fail. Risk big. Dream bigger. One can trot out those prized ponies only so many times before they get a little long in the tooth. So I did what any good writer would do. I went in. I drew open the drawers of my own interior life and scanned their disheveled contents with an exacting eye. Memories and milestones and music albums, books read and bread broken and battles won and lost. All the well-meaning and mean-spirited roadhouses on the road to understanding. I combed through all of it searching for something real, something more than a slogan to share, for some small piece of useful truth I've learned about the world from having lived in it on my own terms as fully as I can. I should warn you that what I'm about to say might be hard to hear. It is also quite graphic in its recounting of certain traumatic events, which might be a little much for a younger audience, but you are adults, and you are moments away from walking off this stage and into the world as it actually is, not only as you wish it to be. So I'm going to go there. There is a language heist afoot in this country that is threatening our ability to show up for each other and for ourselves. We are losing our capacity to confront the injustice that is literally everywhere around us. And I think it has something to do with the kind of violence we are seeing today. In one sense, the violence raining down on the most vulnerable among us, immigrants, indigenous peoples, asylum seekers, refugees, women, children, is horrifying, but it is not startling. Acts of violence against these and other groups are occurring with such frequency, news of it is not in fact new. Stories of thousands of children being separated from their parents, caged, and tear-gassed at the border. Stories of one unarmed Black boy after another, after another, after another, being shot dead by a murderous cop. These stories don't just come in with the morning paper, they come in with the morning light. These are stories of brutality, and they have become as banal as breakfast. Bacon and eggs, a cup of coffee. It is this banality of brutality that is truly troubling. One would think this enough to send us careening into collective action, but it's not. At least it has not been. I think part of the problem is that something else is happening too. The violence that is everywhere erupting at the borders of this country, in Waffle Houses in Georgia, in parking lots in Guam, is of a different degree. A man choked to death for selling loose cigarettes. A woman shot to death for burning white rice. What we are seeing in our communities is increasingly barbaric behavior, and it's immobilizing us, rendering us momentarily incapable of speaking back and speaking up. One of my favorite writers, Alice Walker, wrote a book about this phenomenon. Some years ago, while working with a women anti-war group, she traveled to Rwanda, Palestine, and the Eastern Congo, meeting with survivors of every conceivable kind of violence and listening closely to their accounts. In Rwanda, she recalls the racist origins of the genocide that rocked that country, culminating the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Tutsis by the Hutu. She traces the story all the way back to the Belgians and the Germans before that, who arrived on the scene after centuries of relatively peaceful coexistence between the two clans. So the Belgians decide that the Tutsi, because they had larger skulls, were more like Europeans and thus should be in charge of the Hutu, whose skulls, apparently, were not as large. They instigate this rule of one clan by the other, and it goes on like this for years. When they finally leave, the Belgians place the Tutsi in charge of the Hutu. Unsurprisingly, the hatred that had been building over such a long period erupted into the mass slaughter of 800,000 Tutsis. 800,000 Tutsis in 100 days. On her way to Palestine, while waiting at the border crossing in Rafah, a traveling companion hands her an illustrated postcard depicting a UN partition plan. On the back of the card are the words of former Israeli President Ariel Sharon, known by many as the Butcher of Beirut, where he talks about making a pastrami sandwich of the Palestinian people, riddling their lands with Jewish settlements until no one will be able to imagine a whole Palestine or know it ever existed. Later in the Gaza Strip, she sits in the rubble of recently bulldozed Palestinian homes. She learns of a woman alive but unconscious, whose husband was killed during a 22-day bombardment of Gaza, as were all 5 of her daughters. She wonders who will tell this woman this, when or if she wakes up. She wonders what language could possibly be up for the job. How do you tell a woman that her whole world has died? Finally, in the Eastern Congo, she meets with women who had been victims of rape on so large a scale it could be considered a war crime. One woman who had been a sex slave for over a year until she escaped talks about being raped with every imaginable instrument, from the handle of a machete to the barrel of a gun. Others share similar stories, but one story shakes Alice Walker to her core. She writes, "The suffering had been unbearable as people were chased from their homes at all hours of the day or night, many of them choosing to sleep in the forest or hide themselves in their fields. She was home with her husband and 2 children because, among other reasons, such as this was her home, her husband was sick. One evening, there was a fierce knock at the door. Gunmen who had also carried machetes entered, demanding food. There was little to offer them but the staple diet, a boiled vegetable and a few balls of steamed millet. The men ate this, but were hungry and not satisfied. They went and found the husband, still in bed, and hacked him to pieces on the spot. They came back to Jenna Rose and her children and took hold of her, holding her down. They began to cut off her leg. They cut off her leg, cut it into 6 pieces, and began to fry it in a pan. When some part of it seemed nearly done, they tried to force her son to take a bite of it. Strongly, beautifully, and so much the son of our dreams, he said, 'No, I will not eat my mother's flesh.' They shot him dead. The daughter, seeing this, watching her mother bleeding to death, knowing her father had been hacked to pieces, was now offered the same choice. Terrorized, she bit into a piece of her mother's body. Her mother, having crawled away, does not know what became of her, though she does know that her assailants went next door that same evening and murdered a couple who had been married that day, raping and mutilating the bride and tearing out her eyes. I have not forgotten this child who was forced to eat her mother's flesh for a moment. Yet it has been almost impossible to speak of it. Coming home, I fell ill with the burden of this story. The book is called Overcoming Speechlessness. When asked why she titled it that, Alice responded by saying that there are times when things are so horrible, we literally lose the ability to talk about them. That is to say, in the face of suffering such as this, unspeakable suffering, we come undone. We are left bereft of words to bear witness. We are constitutionally incapable of coming to anyone's rescue, including our own. In the book, she is calling us to overcome that speechlessness, to push past it, to take a step beyond our trauma and into the sun. So here goes. The first time I experienced this phenomenon was in the summer before 4th grade. My family and I had been living in Portland, Oregon for 2 years so that my mom could earn a master's degree in social work. Around the time she was finishing, my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. At the same time, my grandmother, who was suffering from early onset dementia, was sent to Guam ahead of the rest of us, temporarily entrusted to a relative's care. One day after my sister and me had returned home, we were taken to this same relative's house. What I saw that day would sit for years like a stopper in my throat. Once at the house, we asked over and over to see our grandmother, wondering why she was being kept from us. Some time passed, then some more. After what seemed like an eternity, we heard a banging coming from a bedroom in the back. My uncle scurried away to attend to the noise. Unbeknownst to him, I had snuck quietly behind. When he threw open the door, I saw her, my grandmother, half naked and tied to the bed. A brown rope, a silver bowl on the floor. Our eyes met. Hers were wild with fear. I froze. Then a slamming of a door. Then an uncle with a smirk on his face and a key for a lock in his hand. I must have passed out. The next thing I remember is my 8-year-old body hanging upside down by its ankles, crying as 2 of my cousins passed me back and forth, laughing, knowing there was little I could do about it, because I was little, and I had too little power, and I did not have the words with which to fight back, to graft my rage onto the world, to wage war. I had no command over the language I needed to set me or her free. We would eventually get our grandmother out of that house, and she would spend several more years with us into the evening of her life. Mine was the last face she would recognize and the last name she would remember. My last act was singing to her, which incidentally was perfect form, as this was the same woman who played a mean harmonica and taught me to love music, the blues mostly, and bequeathed to me so many gifts, though of the spiritual and not the earthly kind, including an almost religious belief that if God had a voice, it would be Aretha Franklin's. I never shared any of this before, but I am sharing it now with you because I am trying to be brave, and because, as a writer, this is my work to do. As the supremely gifted Arundhati Roy would say, we are living in a time when our words have been butchered and bled of meaning. We writers then are called to take pail to water in this leaky boat of ours, to run toward, not from, our burning house. If not to rescue everyone, then to help as many people as possible rescue themselves by rescuing back language itself, back from the butcher. These days, I take pail to water mostly in my capacity as a human rights lawyer. Together with my team at Blue Ocean Law, we work both here at home and throughout the region using the law to advance the rights of island communities. We provide guidance to island states trying to better protect their natural resources from outside exploitation. We help coastal communities challenge the multinational corporations aggressively seeking to mine the surrounding seabed no matter the environmental cost. We go to court to defend the right of self-determination because the most categorically legitimate longing of human beings is the longing to be free. I share this because this is what it looks like when we are able to overcome our speechlessness, find our fighting words, and step into the sun. We share the sunlight. Graduates, if you look under your seats, you will find your own copy of Overcoming Speechlessness. I worked with the publisher, the good folks at 7 Stories Press in New York, and was able to buy each of you a copy. Lucky for me, they had exactly 273 copies left in their warehouse, which incidentally was exactly enough. Lucky for you, Alice Walker is among the most gifted of us, the kind of writer whose words are so powerful they are like ancestors, loved ones wishing to redeem us, to carry us closer to freedom on their backs if need be. May you find not only your fighting words, but your fighting spirit too. Our broken world is waiting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. We'll move on shortly to the next person. I feel like in Zoom you don't really have those moments that you get in person, right? To hold a story like that. But we very much appreciate all your words in the comment and the stories that you all have given us today and shared with us. I will, for the sake of time and so that we can hopefully have a discussion about all the works, I'm going to move us on to the next piece here. Thank you, Julian. Avesha is up. We'll work on getting Avesha unmuted right now too, hopefully. Avesha Michael is a Los Angeles-based artist, advocate, and teacher who runs a ceramic studio in Culver City, California, where she creates all kinds of handmade functional wares as a means of sharing her love of creation with the world. Prior to doing ceramics full-time, which is a lifelong dream since the age of 7, she was a commercial and fine art photographer for many years. She holds a BA in political science and communications and an MA in spiritual psychology. She has taught both photography and ceramics at various schools, studios, treatment centers, art centers, and out of her Culver City studio. Avesha is also trained and certified in various healing and transformative modalities, including Reiki, Theta, and most currently breathwork, which she finds to be the most powerful modality in healing trauma and disembodiment. She advocates for humanity, human rights, equality, and justice. She believes connection is the core, energy is everything, and knows nature as her religion. She is a trauma survivor in recovery and committed to healing, unlearning, and learning so that she can be an agent of change for herself and turn others. She believes everyone has the right to know their innate worth, have true freedom, and experience and connection in this world. So with that, Avesha, we welcome you to the Zoom speaker gallery, and I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. So before I share my story with you, my story does have to do with domestic violence, so I just wanted to give a little heads up as an awareness point before I begin. It's not that I don't have any, I just don't have many memories. I think that's why I value photos so much. They help me remember things that I don't recall ever happening. They fill the gaps of what I must have felt like as a child, as a teenager, and as a young adult. It didn't even dawn on me this whole time that not remembering most of my life might be a sign of trauma, of coping, and of protection. So of course, when offered a few subjects to share about today, I picked memory, the one thing that I don't have in excess. Yet it seems I have more memories than I realized, despite whole periods of my life with only glimpses of details or feelings. I realized very recently that not remembering much kept me moving forward in life. As much as I feel, and as sensitive as I am, and as much trauma as I've experienced, my disassociated relationship with myself and with my life was much like the moving walkway at Chicago O'Hare Airport where I grew up. It just keeps you going. How I went my entire life until 45, having been in therapy, getting a master's in spiritual psychology, and reading one too many self-help books, not knowing the connection between early childhood development, attachment, or lack thereof, and the impact of trauma, both big and small, still baffles me. But maybe I blocked that out too. I didn't grow up with my mom for the most part, and I never felt love for my dad, not really. So when I ended up in a long-term relationship with my first boyfriend, who I had met in college, I allowed myself to feel attached and feel love somehow. The fact that he traveled for work all the time did unknowingly trigger my abandonment and my attachment issues that ran much deeper than I knew at the time. For all 8 years that we were together, I didn't know, and I had cut myself off from myself and did everything I could not to feel for most of my life. Until this one night, it surfaced in a big way. At the time, I lived on Lemon Grove Avenue in a 1920s apartment built for Paramount Studios, and the living room was huge. The living room was about the size of my entire apartment currently. It was a Sunday evening, and I couldn't wait for him to get home. He would usually be in a handful of cities the week he'd be gone. Like the torture of waiting for my pottery in the kiln to cool enough to crack it open and take a peek. I waited for him to come home and walk through the front door. This night, my longing was met with agitation. So instead of being pulled in and held, or met with a pause after so much absence, after dropping off his bag at the front door, he only wanted his longing, his weed. I was in charge of keeping his stash while he was gone because he knew that he'd always have it when he came home, because when he was away, I didn't smoke it. So instead of his meeting my craving to be close, I was met with accusations and frustration. I felt completely abandoned, invisible, and desperate to connect. He was standing by the built-in bookshelves like a proper 20s apartment in Hollywood should have. And I don't remember everything I kept on those shelves, but there were hundreds of CDs, DVDs, and books. And that's where I kept his weed secretly. I tucked it in the back, waiting for him. I'm not really sure exactly what happened in those minutes that he was home, but the more that he blamed me for misplacing it, just as he did the first night we landed in Hawaii the year prior, the only night I ever spent in Hawaii, as I flew back solo the very next day, the more I wanted to be that bag of weed that he so desperately wanted to find. The more I wanted him to hold me and show me how much he missed me. Him coming home to me was like insulin. I vaguely remember standing in the middle of the room facing him. The walls were this gorgeous 70s light green olive, and they were perfect because I picked the color and I painted them. The more he focused on his obsession with finding it, the deeper my abandonment and my attachment issues were taking over. I was like the 5-year-old little girl in the house before the divorce when no one spoke and all there was a cloud of utter disconnect. I just wanted him to connect with me. I so desperately wanted him to see me, to acknowledge me, to feel me, to hear me. I just wanted him to be present after being gone for nearly a month. And I wanted to feel loved. It seemed so simple, but it was so attainable. It was so unattainable. With each new moment, I felt like he came home for weed and not for me. And it all happened within minutes. My feelings became overwhelming, as they often do, and I went from longing and loving to desperate with rage and completely helpless. In a blink, I threw the mug that I was holding at the wall. It wasn't aimed at him, nor was it intended to be, but in that moment, when it hit that olive green wall and broke, I had no idea how much I would break. With no warning and no memory of those moments, the man I loved and the only man that I have ever loved and called home, the man I found safety in, attacked me. I didn't have time to process what happened. He was twice my size and had his hands around my neck. The same neck whose greatest fear was being unable to breathe. Just like during a near fatal home birth, being strangled by my umbilical cord. The same neck that couldn't wear turtlenecks for fear of suffocation. The same neck that needed car windows open in the dead of winter in Chicago. and the same neck, my lifeline, had hands that were bigger than my dad's, constricting my pathway to breathe. I only faintly remember being attacked and violently pushed to the couch, that 60s caramel velour half-circle couch that I loved so much. He was on top of me. He was choking me. He was snuffing me silent by strangulation, meeting my rage in that one moment with many moments. I know now that one more moment and I could have had no more moments. For so many years, I blocked this out, only periodically remembering it happened. It all happened so fast, and I was in utter shock. I didn't fight him. I couldn't move. His violent rage made him larger than life on top of me, and I don't even know what those moments were like, except altering. The man who I found safety in, and the only person I ever felt cared and wanted my needs met, truly looked out for me and protected me. All these things I didn't get from my parents as a baby and as a child, I found in him until this moment. Now, this very man was violently taking it all away from me. He wanted me silent. He wanted me gone, vacant, lifeless, and non-existent in that moment. Clearly, yet utterly confusing, still after all these years. The thing that harmed me the most was that after he spared my life and released me from his grip, after he released his claws from my skin and let me grasp for a breath, he came back for more. I was still in shock when he jumped me and strangled me again. The first attack stunned me. It crippled me, not knowing anything except survival. But the second broke me. It killed a part of me, and in many ways it still does. All I remember, and for all the traumas, big and small, that I don't remember, I remember the aftermath, like a sinking stone in still water. I only wish the ripples would have reached him. But he left me on the couch, almost lifeless, utterly alone, abandoned like never before. And I thought I knew alone. It was the only thing I knew since birth. It was all I knew every time a parent left, when they divorced, when I endured a lifetime of emotional neglect, of not having all my needs met, of feeling different, of self-loathing and loneliness so deep, it was all I knew. Until this moment. Until this moment, I hadn't known alone, not really. For all the memories I don't have, I have this one. I can feel the depth of pain I was left with. I can remember being limp. I was in utter shock, not being able to process what happened. I can remember particularly the heaviness in my arms, unable to do anything but stare off to my left with my head leaning gently where he left me. Where I had just stood, he sat. Rolling a blunt, he turned on the TV and moved on like the moving walkway at Chicago O'Hare Airport. He kept on like nothing happened. Having his needs met, I didn't exist. I can see myself lying there with streams flowing down my face, sorrow uncontrolled, yet utterly controlled to the point of almost shutdown. Staring vacantly somewhere between where he and the TV were, likely where the weed was actually at, I was stunned. I was stunned like a million deers. Unable to move, unable to function or to understand. How could this man I loved just attempt to take my life? Twice. Though I didn't know even how to process it like that, I just felt the sorrow of the universe and all the universes in those moments. A part of me died, like a star dying that never mattered, that was never seen by anyone, and then it was snuffed out. My spirit felt snuffed out. All I wanted really was love. All I wanted was closeness and connection and care. And the depths of horror I felt laying there ached so deeply I wanted to die. I had survived, only to feel such aching pain inside my chest that I did want to die. What just happened? Like, who is he? How could he? Why didn't I fight? Like, why am I not moving right now? Why did me throwing a mug at a separate wall? lead him to attacking me like I was to be executed. It's as if my mind, or what was left of it, was swirling and seeking some stable ground to land on, but all I had were caverns. I felt like an industrial vacuum just sucked out my chest, like a metal turtleneck just had its way with me, like I must have felt when I was being born. Trauma is a beast, but connection is a kitten, unless you're allergic. But to me, it's a kitten. And I was craving connection outside myself in someone that wasn't capable of connecting himself. Similarly to what it was like when I was a baby and a child growing up with emotionally unavailable parents. And the mug was my little girl screaming, "I need you to stop and see me." But really screaming. I so desperately needed connection and love and comfort. I mean, don't we all just want to be acknowledged and to be seen and heard and felt? Don't we all want the vastly vacant loneliness that haunts us to be met like a lost kitten finding her way home, to be welcomed with shelter and care and comfort? In truth, I've never processed or shared that night in detail until right now. I didn't ever speak about what happened, what I felt, or what I needed to heal. I had disassociated to cope, like I did for most of my life. And it's important I don't simply play the victim and blame what happened outside of myself. I now understand more about trauma bonds and how emotional neglect can lead to self-neglect. And I'm continuing to look at my part in the dynamic. But it's also important that I don't bypass and self-impose what I learned my whole life, that I created it and that I needed it to grow. I'm replacing a lifetime of either or and black and white with both and. I look for the learning while unraveling my part, owning my imbalances and wounds, and still, no person has the right to assault another as he did me. My therapist asked me many months ago, when was the last time that you advocated for yourself? And in that moment, I had nothing. I was speechless. Today I can speak my story, one of many. And this is advocating for myself, validating my own feelings, revealing my own secrets and dark shame held inside. And I'm learning to observe my needs and my triggers and my feelings. And every single day is a continual practice of not abandoning myself, to not seek love outside of myself. Therapy, breathwork, and particularly nature gift me healing and connect me back to myself. And while not linear, it is the only way home. As my breathwork teacher, Erin Telford, said in class this morning, we are clearing our trauma responses to be able to meet the moment. And this is my work, and I am committed to my healing. This trauma doesn't define me, but I remember it, and I'm using it to heal. And it's interesting because I sit here in my ceramic studio sharing this with you, and I now make mugs for a living, handles and all, and I throw them on a wheel. The vessel of a mug, it holds, and vessels are held in our hands, and in turn, I feel like they hold us. And in doing so, bring a tremendous amount of comfort. So in the same light, I just want to thank you for being my vessel today, for holding me while I shared my story with you. And I truly believe that connection is everything within myself and with each other. And every time we feel connected, we don't feel so alone. And it brings greater healing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. I'll clap for everybody. Again, you can show your reactions down here, and I believe the chat is opening up as well right now. But thank you, Avesha. Thank you for sharing such a difficult story, and I know that must have been hard. We're going to move on, and we're going to talk to Miztla. Aguilera. She is an indigenous woman who descends from Micheca and Tomba nations. She was born and raised in Southern California, and she graduated this year with her BA in Chicano and Latino Studies, as well as a certificate in American Indian and Indigenous Studies from CSU Bologna, or Long Beach, some of you may know it as. She is a paddler in training for the Tiat Society, which is also a sponsor of this program tonight, which is the Traditional Council of Pimu. Again, Pimu Catalina is the English name for Pimu. And I have to just add a little bit that Miztla is amazing. She's currently in LA, and she's just a ball of wonderful energy, and she does a lot of work for her community and others. She's a really wonderful person. So I'm excited to hear her story as a Tomba youth living in Tavanga. So Miztla, you ready?
Yeah, sorry about the ghetto birds going by. That was not meant to happen, but happened. Yes, thank you. Meha, aweshkoneha, amobuka wankoy, amotchavaneha, netwanyan Miztlayolxochitl. Very LA experience right now. Neshuk tokure harot dongbet, shababet, neshukut oite harot meshika, sakataskabet, kweguanakwatovet, metepojat tehovet, eyushumpujat tehovet, wiabmiat ekwangaromet ema achema, wesh konecha ehetehov kopami. Greetings to you all. As Mishuana said, my name is Miztlayolxochitl Aguilera. I am Mexica from Guanajuato and Zacatecas, and Tongva from the San Gabriel Mission. And this is a memory that basically has gone full circle for me at this time. Oriya wetna totobana. 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 Walking into worlds. When this phrase was translated into Tongva, it was meant to represent how Native Indigenous people walk between the worlds of academia and their culture. For me, this phrase was an acknowledgement of who I was as someone who was Mexica, Mexican, and Tongva. Growing up, people mostly only saw the Mexican part of me, from my name to how I dressed. But at Cal State Long Beach, at Pubungna, I learned to walk in both worlds simultaneously. Pubungna in my Tongva language means the gathering place. In our origin story, it is the place where we as humans emerged and learned how to be humans and learned what our responsibilities were as protectors of the Hunukbetam, the beings that came before us, the plants and the animals. For me, Pubungna is the gathering place of my most treasured memories. In March, Pubungna gathered singers and dancers from all over, and I can still remember making blue corn, acorn pancakes with my aunties and dancing in the arena during intertribals. Sometimes my auntie would bring our tiat, our plank canoe, Momarahiko, breath of the ocean, to the powwow. One year, my uncles actually carried this 27-foot canoe into the arena, and I remember looking at her and thinking she was so beautiful with the abalone inlay and the lashings that my family had made to put her together. And she seemed so incredible in my eyes that I couldn't imagine being able to be tall enough to reach the top of her, let alone to be able to paddle her. During dinner time at the powwow, I always got to sing with my aunties and my uncles using our clapper sticks and rattles. Tai hunu kane shune shun, tai hunu kane shune shunai, kwane shunai, kwai. Nahai kwane shunai kwai. Ine ya one, ine ya one, ine ya one, one janu Oya, Janu, Oya. My favorite part of that weekend would always come right after. They would call the student special, and the American Indian Student Council would be honored by the entire arena. I watched my mom, my aunties, my uncles dance in that arbor and walked behind them as the student song played through the speakers. Dakota peke, wana wampe me chiawo. And I always thought to myself that I couldn't wait to dance to that song as a student myself. At the Native graduation, I would see my family stand with the new graduates to be honored as alumni, while my uncle sang the alumni song for them. And every year I would look at the beaded graduation caps, and I thought to myself, I can't wait to earn the right to stand in line with my family and to be able to sing that song as an alumni. When I was 17, it was my first Long Beach Puvungna powwow as a student council member and powwow committee member. I can remember that I tried to stand tall because I knew our places had changed, and this time my family was dancing behind me. But the moment that I heard the singers, I broke down crying. And as every person that had become my powwow family came up to us, and they hugged me or shook my hand and told me that they were proud of me, I couldn't contain the emotions that overcame me. I couldn't believe it was real. That year, my auntie also told me that it was time that I learned to paddle. And while Marahiko still seemed so much larger than me, I knew that I would be okay. I was surrounded by my uncles and cousins as I began to paddle with them, and I heard my auntie singing her song, and in that moment, it felt like Marahiko was taking me home. Momarahiko pararahamino, Momarahiko pararahamino, pararahamino, pararahami, pararahamino, pararahami. That feeling carried over into the next year when I came out in my Tongva regalia, supported by my aunties and uncles once again. I knew I had made them proud, and I couldn't wait to wear it at graduation, representing who I was in a place that was our home. And this year I graduated from Cal State Long Beach. Our powwow was canceled, and so was our graduation. I never got to dance in that arena for the last time as an undergraduate student, nor did I get the chance to stand as an alumni at graduation while my family sang the alumni song. But I know that when it's safe again, I will get that chance. And hopefully, my nephews, my nieces, and my cousins can watch and be encouraged like I was to continue their education. And maybe, just maybe, I'll dance behind them as students and stand with them as alumni and support them as they learn how to walk in two worlds as well. Oriya wet na totobana. Oriya wet na totobana. Oriya wet na totobana. Oriya wet na totobana. Achima, thank you.
Yahweh Mitzvah, that was beautiful. That's a good story, and we all hope that someday soon we'll all be together and be celebrating, especially celebrating our youth and all of those memories soon, soon, hopefully. I know it's been a hard year. So we do have another storyteller on board. I believe you can leave comments here. And last but certainly not least, we have George Blake joining us. I don't see him up in my little...
I'm up here.
Okay, great.
I'm over here.
Excellent. He is a Maryland native. George Blake is a learner and then a teacher. He has a varied academic history, having attended public and private art schools, completing his undergraduate and graduates from Morgan State University, in a historically Black college. It exceptionally equipped him to be an innovative and dedicated English professor. Fortuitously, George embraced his career, beginning in adult literacy and later at Morgan State as a full-time lecturer. George is also a successful writer, having written and or published in many forms and genres, from marketing materials to self-help books to television episodes as recently as 2020. George happily takes that experience into the classroom. Since moving to LA in 2001, he has been part of the full-time faculty since 2017. So with that, we'd love to welcome George, and we're very excited to hear your memories and your stories. So thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. I have to tell you, I've been incredibly blessed just hearing some of the experiences and reflecting on memory in ways that I have not in a long time. So I have to thank you all. What I wanted to talk about myself was that memory, when this was brought up, was actually quite topical for me, because my class at LA Trade Tech and I were actually discussing memory related to one of the assignments. They were looking at social media, and their assignment was to discuss memory versus social media posts. And so it led us down an interesting path. And for me, what it ultimately led to was that memory has this quality to it that you can never get from recording, because memory allows you to forget. And that sometimes is an incredible blessing if you've been in a traumatic experience. To not remember all of the visceral parts of it sometimes can save you. Sometimes it can lead you to laughter, and it has for me. I've done a little stand-up comedy, and all my pain, all my memories went into my humor, because it was the best way to process them for me at the time. So I think I left with the idea that memory is far superior, because you get this ability to recreate, to retell, to process, which you can't do by looking at a picture, because the picture's the truth. It's that captured moment, and it is exactly as it is. And so given that, I thought I would share 3 particular short memories with you. One of them is not wholly my own memory. It's my mother's memory of me. The other is a memory of my own, and the last is a memory that people tell me of myself. And so the first one is from my mother. I asked her ask your mother for a birthday gift. My mother's a lovely person who asks me for my address every year and doesn't send me anything. And I've lived in the same place for 20 years. So I asked her one year to give me something no one else could. Tell me about my first few days on the planet. Tell me what you think of me. And so she sent me this. Happy birthday to my wonderful son. My memories of your childhood and manhood have made me cry and smile. To begin with, I had hoped that you would be born on January 1st, 1971. Why, might you ask? Well, I was hoping to get all the gifts that are given to the firstborn for the new year. Plus, we were poor, and I was concerned that you would not have enough. Well, that didn't work out. You came exactly the time you were supposed to. And as far as the gifts, I did manage to get you a few things. Your father, the character that he is, thought you were too light-skinned. I had to remind the idiot that his father was white or something. Anywho, you must have sensed that I am going to be a good baby, because in fact, you were. The problem I had was that 24-hour crying marathon when I brought you home. Thank God my neighbor, Mrs. Alston, came over to tell me you were too hot and you had to take off some of those clothes. I didn't know why. I never thought of it. I also remember Cousin Elizabeth telling me you were lucky because you looked like me. Some old wives' tale about sons looking like their mothers makes them lucky. I never believed in luck, but I knew that you were special. Another memory was your eyes were so big that you watched everything with incredible intensity. I was in the kitchen and gave you a newspaper to read. Now, you were still a baby in a car seat, and I must have given it to busy you, but you looked at it as if you could read it. And that's when I gave you a book instead of paper to read. You had such charm that all the women in the neighborhood loved you. First, you were cute and well-mannered. I even remember your kindergarten graduation when we had lunch together. You must have been 5 years old, and it was just the two of us. You pulled out my chair for me, and I was so surprised. I asked where you learned that. I think you said in kindergarten. You remember Mrs. Hayes, your teacher? She thought the sun rose and shone on you. She probably taught you. So that's a part of my mother's memory of me. And the greatest gift of it is only your mother can tell you what you were like in the beginning. So I get to add to my picture of myself and not have something that I don't remember. The second memory is several years down the road. So let's flash forward 20 something years. I'm undergraduate at Morgan State University. I'm walking across campus on a regular day, and I get stopped by a group of people. And I talk to them, we exchange, we laugh. I make it about 4 feet, and people come up to me and start laughing and joking with me. Well, I've got to get to class, so I start walking again. And I end up walking into another crowd of people, and we're talking and exchanging, and they're laughing at my jokes. And this kept happening all the way till I reached Holmes Hall, where my English class was. And I stopped right at the door and looked behind me and thought, am I popular? No one knows who I am. How did I just speak to 200 people? Well, later that day, I was at my godmother's office. She was also a speech professor at my college. And I told her what happened. And she said, well, you know, it's interesting popularity. It's sort of nothing until you do something with it. It's like equity in my home. I remember her saying that. And I said, well, what do you do with it? And she says, well, does anything bother you? And I started to complain about the campus. So she said, well, maybe you should use your popularity to change things. So I thought, okay, fine. Flippantly, I said, I'll run for homecoming king. Now, I am a Black man, yes, at a Black university, but I am also a gay man. And in the Black community, you can be many things, but you cannot be gay, because that is a bar. So how is gay me and all my exuberance and my pride parades going to win these people over? Well, problems. I had no money. My godmother said, here's $30 for my whole campaign. I'm running at the time against one person who's a legacy. His fraternity had always been Mr. Morgan State and always been the homecoming king with no exceptions. And I'm running against another Black man who's in the Nation of Islam. Now, I don't know if you understand what men look like in the Nation of Islam, but they are clean, suits every day, perfectly shaven, GQ magazine. So I'm running against Black GQ and a legacy, and there's little gay me in my rainbows. Well, you get creative is what you do. So I reached out to a friend and I said, you know, you draw really well, so why don't you just draw some cartoons for me? Not with me in them, just with cartoons mentioning me. So we started putting out these cartoons with Beavis and Butthead recommending to vote for me. They started getting taken down. So I was worried and I started inquiring what happened. And I found out people were saving them. They loved them. They were keeping them in books in their rooms. So I had to put more up. My little $30 plan was starting to work. And then they told us we had to prepare for the pageant. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in a pageant, or you've ever known anybody in a pageant or seen a pageant, but it is far more excruciating and soul-crushing than you can imagine. The first thing they said was, we're going to need you to have 5 outfits. I'm a college student. I only have 5 outfits. That's it. I've got 4 t-shirts and 4 pairs of pants, and I recycle a sweatsuit. So I've got to find clothes. They also told us we were going to have a question and answer period, and we have to know all about the history of Morgan State. We're going to be quizzed on stage in front of everyone, a la Miss America. Then they told us that we had to have a talent ready for the talent portion. And you've got to have something to wear for when your final presentation to be seen as a potential Mr. Morgan State. So I didn't know what to do. I called out to my best friend of many years, and I said, okay, you've got a lot of clothes. I want to borrow as many of them as I can. And grateful I was that he allowed me to go through his closet. And this would seem like a great idea, except my waist is a 28 and his is a 31. So I'm borrowing clothes that are too big for me. And I'm going to get on stage in front of people and wear them. When we got to what kinds of clothes to wear, he had helped me with virtually every outfit. I had a couple of things of my own to put together, but then there was an evening wear outfit. And I had asked the incumbent Mr. Morgan State, what is evening wear and how do men wear evening wear? I've never heard that term. And I said, do you mean black tie? To which he replied, no, black tie, gray tie, doesn't matter, evening wear. And so, suspicious, but willing to try what he said, I'd asked my best friend for something evening wear. So Glenn, my best friend, loving and caring as he is, offers me a beige light wool suit. It's the 90s, so it's loose fitting with wide leg pants. And I weigh 130 pounds with rocks in my pockets at the bottom of the ocean. So I'm swimming in clothes. I've got a giant jacket that's 3/4 length with shoulder pads. But wait, fringe. Did I mention fringe? Under the arms, across the back, pinstriping down the side like a tuxedo stripe. That's what I had for evening wear. The night of the pageant comes. I do well in the competition, so that I do well with speech. Great. I do well with question and answer. Fine. Talent gets by. I even do well with presenting myself for that History of Morgan thing where you got to do the Miss America thing. And if you know what I mean by the Miss America thing, it's when you approach the microphone with a plastic smile from ear to ear and you say to everyone, hi, my name is George Blake. I'm an English major with a 3.7 GPA. Ugh, that's what I had to do. But I did that too. I rushed backstage to get into my evening wear and I noticed the other two gentlemen are in tuxedos. And I thought, well, I asked earlier if it was black tie. So I went back to the incumbent Mr. Morgan and he said to me, oh, I didn't know you meant that. And I am stuck with Las Vegas, which is how I refer to the outfit as my tribute to Las Vegas, to wear on stage. I go on stage, we're all positioned. I'm in the back row in the far corner and I'm grateful. I'm drowning in clothes. I'm about to embarrass myself. I had a shot at this and now it's not gonna happen. And then that little small voice we all hear, the one that saves your life, the one that makes you reach for something that'll save your life or call the friend at the last moment, actually said to me in these words, you have been in a lot of fashion shows. You better freak the fuck out of this outfit right now and sell it to them like it's the most expensive thing they've ever seen in their lives. And as I'm hearing this, I am not kidding, it came over my body and my feet began to shift, as did my hip and shoulder, and I posed and turned my head the other way a la GQ, and I'm doing this thinking this is never going to work. The curtain opens, and I'm the first one that has to go out because I'm in the back. And as I hit that runway to come out, and it should happen to everyone, an entire auditorium of people who would ridicule me for being gay stood to their feet and applauded and cheered and screamed. And I couldn't believe the moment. I stumbled for a moment. I remember stumbling as I was walking because I was literally taken aback. And then I finished it. I had to freak it. So I freaked it, twirled the jacket, all the stuff, all the showy stuff, and made it back. And and as everyone finished their walks and we all left the stage to go to get up to prepare ourselves to meet with all of our contingent of followers so that they could carry our campaigns forward outside, the incumbent Mr. Morgan came to me and stopped me and said, I'm going to tell my frat brother in 5 minutes that the best thing he can do is go out there right now. But I'm going to tell him in 5 minutes. And it dawned on me that he was telling me to give me 5 minutes ahead of his frat brother, that he saw me too, that moment was real. I moved forward a little bit and I'll say it went well. Met people, exchanged with them. ended up becoming Homecoming King, all of the good stuff about that. But the part that really grabs me the most, the part that is the most divine of all of the memory, despite the parts that I pick up later as I remember the trauma of a part or the pain of a part or the rough patch of a part, is him saying to me, I see you. It's the divinity of memory, I think. And the last thing I'll say for memory was a memory given to me. Because the triumph of being Mr. Morgan shows that no good deed goes unpunished. 6 months later, in the student government office, I was outed in front of about 200 people. That memory is as searing and as powerful as the other. They are inextricably linked. I embrace them both. I accept that I've allowed myself to forget certain parts, because telling the story of my memory empowers me, allows me to be the hero in my story, gives me agency in my story. So memory, for all of its forgetfulness or for how we turn it and manipulate it, I think is a true gift to us because of the things we get to remember and the things we get to forget. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those stories. They're really, truly wonderful. It makes me think I should write a letter to my children telling them about the themselves. It's very inspiring. So we are running a little later than expected. Why don't we just take a time to meet and chat, and I'll open it up to everybody if that's okay, Beth. And then I'll do a little bit of closing comments after.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
So the chat's open if folks want to. Did you want mics on now, or should we stay with chat?
Yeah, let's stay with let's just see if there's anybody. I'll try to put it on gallery and see if anybody has a question.
Okay, great. And we'll turn off our recording now.
Yeah. If anybody